My name is Vaughn Gage, and I'm about to share with you some of the conspiracy theories that have always interested me, and as I dug a little deeper, even re-educated me more as to what goes on in the other parts of the world that are undercover and nobody talks about, but they do call it the deep state. So this one is about the Bush family, rise to power through oil, booze, and drugs. We're going to start with the Skull and Bones and what its purpose was. The money for the fraternity Skull and Bones at the time came from America's biggest drug dealer, Samuel Russell. In 1832, Yale had always been attended by white Protestants of families with money and influence. Every year they pick 15 new initiates called bonesmen. The graduates, are dedicated to each other and new members in support of liberty, equality, and fraternity. However, because so many of its members are tycoons of industry, policymakers in the government are former bonesmen, and their job is to protect the Federal Reserve and the families that control it. They are not dedicated to the citizens of the U.S. in general, but rather they work together to keep control of finance and world economic policies that could affect the wealthy and corporate tycoons of the past, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgans, to the present, the Bush family and other political leaders that believe in the policies of the Federal Reserve. They control the money without any oversight by the people. The global conspiracy for world control, along with goals and members of the Illuminati, and using the arm of the CIA to finance covert operation, keeps the U.S. as a global leader with little pushback for almost 7 decades. George W. Bush was the leading creator of the CIA's primary function, to facilitate the control of the U.S. on drugs, guns, and terrorism. They have helped governments rise or fall. If there is any pushback anywhere globally, the CIA decides the future of these nations. The U.S. is the only country with over 700 military bases worldwide. Over 2 million soldiers are waiting and ready to respond to any crisis that could affect the U.S. The Bush family wants us all to believe that their wealth came from oil, but it comes from drugs and guns and sponsored terrorism. Because the CIA could bypass the law, they could support or destroy any entity that could supplant the U.S. in world policy. And so we begin. The Bush family came up with a plan to sponsor drug cartels with a cut from the sale of these drugs going into mafia-financed banks, which asked few questions. The sale of guns and advanced weapons to countries that were sponsored to be the U.S. enemies proved to be embarrassing. Because the CIA could access money that the Senate did not need to approve, they could embark on any plan that supported the deep state's agenda, an organization of corporate and public leaders that cared only about preserving their power and generational wealth. They sponsored both sides of every war from 1830 on. They could put out propaganda that would incite people to act irrationally and not always in their best interest, but still add to a few power brokers' wealth. Initially, the CIA was only to spy on other nations to ensure the U.S.'s continual power. If that meant planning a coup or changing governments in other countries, so be it. Murder and mayhem was a tool the CIA mastered, and the mafia was often the master of all. To prove that this was a common practice, the CIA and the hidden government, the U.S. military, were caught in a Reagan administration, proving that the drug money collected by the CIA would pay for drugs from Iran to buy guns for the freedom fighters, the Contra, in Nicaragua. Between Cuba, Russia, North Korea, and other countries deemed terrorist states, the CIA made sure its influence was felt. Through terrorism, banking manipulation, money laundering, and murder, they have kept control of the Federal Reserve agenda, which may well be world domination. For decades, the U.S.-financed organizations maintained control of overall policies that affected the private banks' plans for all of humankind's future. There have even been rumors that the 41st president of the United States, George Walker Bush, Poppy to his close allies, was the architect of drugs for guns. They decide who the next drug lord will be. If they do not bend to the will of the CIA, they will just be replaced. Are we free as a citizen of a democratic government, Canada, how much influence does the Federal Reserve, members of the Skull and Bones, and the CIA have over government's policies of Canada? Has CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, been up to no good on behalf of our government and to the secrecy of Canadian citizens? It's my thought that often governments really do pander to the wealthy, to the people who give them money. And if your election renewal depends on somebody else's to finance it, but their agenda is different than yours, often they are able to influence your agenda. But the most surprising thing in this was how many banks have been involved, set up by mafia, proven criminals who commit terrorism, murder, and launder the CIA's money. Also, because the CIA cannot collect a small amount off the top of the drug sales, they actually don't have to go to Congress. They don't have to go to anyone and get permission for anything they want to do. They literally get to go willy-nilly and go where they want, do what they want, and change the history of many countries, which really they don't have any right to do. And one more thing that's interesting. Of over 700 bases in the US, Russia only has 2 other bases, China only has 2 other bases, and the rest of the world, nobody has any. Iran has not got bases all over the world to take over and, share different philosophies than Canadians or Americans or other free countries have. Nobody else has it. Russia doesn't have it. Nobody has. So who should we really be afraid of? Maybe the fear is below our 49th parallel, and maybe we need to watch a little bit. And I have been an American watcher, and the reason being that I had always been told that when the United States sneezes, we catch cold.
I was, so we're talking about the Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah. Well, that's the proof. That's like, there it is. No matter what you say, by the 80s, everything that he had set up in the 50s and the ideas and the things they were doing, well, it was caught as proof in the 80s, but it had been going on for 30 years. It was not new.
So, George Bush was active in Afghanistan.
Yep.
So was Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Obama inherited it at least, and he made decisions that I used to watch and look at his foreign policy and think, it sucks. It's chicken. It's chicken. However, he didn't start it, and it was started. Everything that's happened up now was started well into the early part of the beginning of the CIA, and President Bush, or the Bush family, but President Bush has been, the perpetrator of those plans and the person that probably set in motion many plans so that they could get money and not go to Congress and be able to manipulate. Now, remember, Standard Oil, it looks like they made their money in Standard Oil, but not really. Their biggest part of their money comes from drug cartels, and often the backing of their presidency comes from criminal enterprises. So we're electing criminals, or the US is. Canadians are a little different. We are not lifers. We're not political lifers. It would be hard to find very few, except maybe the leaders of the party, who have been in for even more than 20 years. Where the US, you can be a senator for 47 years, much as we have seen that Biden has been able to do. So I'm not going to say we're a little more pure, but we come in with that innocence, and I don't think we stay in long enough to get as corrupted. But I truly believe that as you stay longer as an elected official, and more of what you do for the country has been determined by the people that gave you the money, I cannot see how, if you want to keep being elected, you don't keep supporting their agenda rather than one that would be better for the people. Clubs. You may well get accepted in one of those other 2, but to be asked to be one of the 15 that comes into Skull and Bones, there is a criteria: white, Protestant, not Catholic, and the fact that your family or other people that know your family are connected to wealth and influence. And the only agenda that many of them care about as titans of industry is their pocketbook, their growth, what's good for them. And to me, I think if I look at things now, we're headed towards corporate socialism. And my biggest fear is with COVID that it would be so easy after we lose a lot of companies to again lean more and more on the larger ones, which we have done with Amazon. Amazon's gotten richer. Many of the corporations have gotten richer through this. So again, they make sure that no matter what goes on, they stack the deck for themselves, not for us. We the people, or they the people, or us Canadians, not much. It is, because in the end, those families and their far-reaching connections, which is to the S&P 500, I mean, they intimately know the corporate leaders of all of the S&P 500. If their agenda is more powerful, the influence of money more powerful, and often the elite look at us kind of like little ants running around. I don't think they connect to us at any level, and therefore whatever doesn't work for us is really not their problem, because they're not us. So, earlier in the 70s, when I had first heard of the possibility of what they wanted to do to cull the population, and the reason being that they want whatever the resources are for the few. So to be able to get us down to 500 million and get rid of 7 billion is a challenge, but it was never a challenge, and it couldn't be implemented, not in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but since 2020 it can, because AI technology can be used to supplant our jobs. So a factory can have AI, they can make your pizza. So as less of us are needed, then certainly the plan is to only have 500 million people on this planet. And to do that, there is no way except maybe to stop 2 generations of people from having children. But the plot is big. And here's the thing, Skull and Bones might have only been a fraternity early in the game, although it was backed by criminal money, and maybe they thought they could still control the rich sons of rich tycoons. But the Federal Reserve really only came into being in the early part of the century, 1820 below, so their plan to be solidified actually started because the Rothschilds, it started in the 1700s. And setting up his sons with banking and then banking institutions to lend. But remember, the rich and the powerful, they're the ones that really make all the decisions. And I think we found that more as the internet came. We got to be less innocent. I mean, I think that for years, being able to say the Lord's Prayer and being able to give the prayer of allegiance and different things that brought out really good feelings from people, I don't think any of them ever realized way back in a more innocent time that really we've never been free. And anything we get that looks good only comes if it's okay with them. Otherwise, it won't happen. And they support both parties. They fund all the wars. They don't care what side wins or loses because they'll manipulate and control them.
Now, this drug dealer who funded this, who is this?
Well, the drug dealer that funded it, and he was with drugs, and you'd have to go back to 1832, but Samuel Russell. So, it was said that at the time that he put this together, he was really America's biggest drug dealer. So there it is, criminal money wanting to influence the Protestant, wealthy, white young men, and in order to make them influence in the early part of the years, the Skull and Bone was part of it, because they could literally, through wanting to be accepted, wanting to be part of something, pull off these young men and then start to groom them for something in the future. Now that comes much more to head in the 1920s, but here we are. We're 100 years later, and it would have to be descendants of these people that are going to try to benefit. But they think of generational wealth. They think of their legacy. They don't think from paycheck to paycheck. We couldn't even begin to understand how they see the world and what they want from it. And certainly by now, we've all proven since the 70s that pollution didn't get much better and that we are the creators of it. And so getting the population down may be an accepted idea until you find out how they plan to do it. Now, personally, I don't want them to set loose a virus that makes me bleed out of every orifice and die on the streets in 12 hours. However, having sent this one, has destroyed the economic fabric. So again, their plans go miles ahead of us, miles. And now they look at the planet, know that it can't survive, and have to find a faster way than they thought in the 70s in order to achieve this plan. Because they did start with Africa, they did start with other countries. I'm going to just say the word Bill Gates, and then we'll have another discussion about Bill. But Bill Gates was very much the architect. And, you know, he is in country after country after country. He stands to make huge profits from any vaccine and every vaccine, not just this one. And he has his fingers in, you know what, that's going to be next week. Because when you see what Bill Gates has his fingers in and what he's buying and what he's doing, I think you've got to be afraid that maybe he's the biggest puppet master of all right now.
Or they're allowing him to play that role anyways.
Yeah.
And he can move and shake because he's got money.
The family is worth $400 million. So obviously whatever they were doing wasn't lining their pockets, but it was lining their supporters' pockets. And for a politician, like a generational politician, because even Prescott Bush ran and, you know, was in the Senate. So for that generational political aspiration, the Bushes really have no reason to curb the CIA, to curb the drug deals, to curb any of it, because those are the people that have supported them in the past, which is mafia drug dealers. And the amount of banks that deal with the mafia and launder money, it could come from some place that looks innocent, some group that looks innocent, and really you dig deeper and it's funded by mafia money.
So what's Bush doing now? Is he still involved, or is he just sitting on his $400 million?
I'm not sure that the both boys, you know, either of them had the influence or the wherewithal that their father had. And I think that because their father was part of the CIA, was able to deal with different types of people, he was more willing to maybe open up his choices a bit. However, Jeb Bush in the 80s and 90s lobbied him to pardon some of the biggest crime bosses of all time. So, you know, here they are, they get arrested by, you know, the FBI, and then once they're in and they're charged and found guilty, then the president gets to just say, it's okay, you have a pardon, go back to what you were doing. Oh, and by the way, where's my next check?
Yeah.
Yep. It's in their best interest.
Yes.
Not the people's. That's the big thing. If we're looking for policies, this is the U.S., you know, and again, I do feel Canada's different in the fact that we do not have generational politicians. You know, even our top politicians, we seem to only have to put up with for about 8 and then maybe another 8, 16 years tops. They can be, you know, part of the government and then they can be the opposition. But for the most part, they're not career. They're not forever. And I do think Canadians start off, and maybe Americans too, with some principled ideas. However, once you've been in for 47 years and there is no limit on how often they can run, same with us, but they tend to be able to go generational. So, you know, when you've watched politics over the span of 50 years, you have almost seen everything, certainly from the 70s, when plots were made, you know, for different things, one of them which was to cull the population, different ideas. It's another 170 years. And so how far along are those plans when they were so dedicated to them? And really, I believe if China knew that we were planning that maybe the vaccination was going to have a sterilizing agent, or India, they go, fine, go for it. You know, we have too many poor people. We have peasants. You know, China has a new emerging rich, which are their friends of their friends of their friends. But with 1.6 billion people, trust me, they're not worried about that 1.6 billion or 5.99. It's just those few thousands up at the top. And if it's generational and you know, people that have been in the Senate or the House for like 50 years, who else do they influence? They are the people who inspire the next generation of politicians and the next generation of politicians. But if all of them slowly give up a little slice of what they think means freedom or whatever, and they slowly rise to the point where they're not being with normal people, they're not, I mean, their constituents, you know, it's in an office, they're in Washington most of the time, it's their staff that handles things. But overall, it still boils down to that for many of these elected officials, they start to believe the propaganda that they were sold, and they keep selling it to the next people. And so nobody really knows, you know, how does the government really run? Well, it doesn't run as open and as free as what everyone thinks, certainly in the States.
Okay. I think that's, we've got 25 minutes, you know, by the time we put the beginning and the end and the PowerPoint commercial, we got a half hour.
Perfect. It's a date for me, baby.
Awesome.
Hey, and maybe we should, now that the restaurants are open, we should have a coffee and just talk about where we're going on everything.
Sure.
Friday, would you like to have a coffee at, or can you on Friday? You've been this week a bit.
And I am a part of the Power of Pink, as I hope you will be too. I have been in the beauty business for over 50 years, and I'm owner of 5 salons, a clothing store, I've had a restaurant, so I've been a great entrepreneur in my mind. And you hit a certain age and you really do want to pass it on. And that's what the Power of Pink is all about, is that I pass on the information that I know to you and hope that you are able to take that information and transform yourself. Now here's another thing. If you go into the Power of Pink and you buy the beauty book, you will get tips from head to toe on everything that is current and viable and how to do it. You will learn contouring, you will learn about body shapes, you will learn about hairstyles and makeup, and by the end, you will be an expert. The other thing is every single lesson is accompanied by a video. So if you learn by seeing, you can read the text, watch, and accomplish it. And I also broke them down into little segments so that if you just want to look at eyes, you can certainly go to just eyes and see what it is that I taught you. But more importantly, the book, Everything I Know I Learned from Oprah, is a free book. And all it is a quote, all quotes from Oprah, and then my interpretation of those quotes and how they affect my life. And what I hope you'll do is you'll go through the same quotes and simply see if it stirs something in you. See if there's a memory that comes. Write it down. And the idea is to move forward with our lives and to get to know ourselves. So knowing ourselves really is the lesson, and it really is why we're here. To be able to look at ourselves as a physical person and a spiritual person at least broadens our horizons and makes us much more interesting. So please hit the button, go to the Power of Pink, and start your lessons now. And be sure to recommend it to friends.